What are we doing today?
We're going to catch some crabs, guys.
So if you want to dive for crabs, there are first a few things you will need. The first is a mask and snorkel. I mean, it is possible to dive with swimming goggles, but I suggest not to, especially if you don't want your eyes to pop out of your head. Next up, you'd want a catch bag or a float to put your crabs in after you catch them. And I highly recommend getting some sort of float with a dive flag if possible, as it will help make you visible in the water, as I've found there tends to be a lot of boats and jet skis zooming around the metro waters, especially in summer. A few other things that will help is a wetsuit, especially if you plan to be out in the water for a few hours, as it will help keep you warm. You don't necessarily need a diving wetsuit, as the water gets pretty hot in summer and you can just get away using a surf one. However, if you're a beast like Brian, you can just go in your underwear. Also, having a pair of fins is going to make it much easier to swim and dive. In that being said, I started off diving with no fins and still managed to get a feed of crabs. Lastly, any sort of gloves is going to help make grabbing them a lot easier and save you from losing some blood along the way. Now that you're all ready and geared up, it's time to swim out and catch them. So all of the metro beaches like Brighton, Henley, Glenelg and Semaphore, all of the reef offshore, and I've found that's where the crabs tend to hang out. But occasionally you might get lucky and see a couple while swimming out. Unfortunately, this crab had eggs, which means they are illegal to take and must be left alone. Once you make it out to the reef, it's time to start looking for them. If the water is really clear, you can sometimes spot them from the surface, but I find there's a much higher chance of spotting them if you dive down and swim along the weed line, as they like to tuck themselves underneath the ledge. Another thing I've noticed is that during the day, they tend to hide away and bury themselves in the sand, whereas later in the afternoon and night, they come out and they are much more active, making them a lot easier to spot and catch. So keep that in mind if you're solely after just catching them. Make sure you stick around to the end of the video for another bonus tip that will help you get your bag of crabs a lot quicker. But if you found this video helpful so far, I'd really appreciate if you could give it a like, as it really does help with the YouTube algorithm. Anyway, once you spot a crab, it's not too difficult to catch, and it really just comes down to how scared you are of getting nipped, which will determine how hard it'll be, as at first it can be quite daunting trying to grab crab with your hands. And from my experience, it's only when you hesitate grabbing the crab is when you get nipped. So commit and you won't get nipped. But if you're wearing gloves, most of the time the crab will just nip the edges of your gloves rather than your skin, and as long as it's not your actual finger, you'll be fine.
Ow, 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 ow!
There's so many different ways to grab a crab, and a few techniques which I think are the most effective are the claw grab, which is literally just grabbing both claws at the same time, or grabbing one and then quickly grabbing the other before it has enough time to nip your hand. Or if the crab has buried itself, it's pretty easy. I normally just swim over and pin it down and then grab it. Or if it doesn't spot you first, you can sneak up behind it and simply just grab it. Or if you really just don't care about getting nipped, you can just grab its face. And that being said, if you're really worried about getting nipped, you can always just use a rake, tongs, a snare, or even just drop a net with bait in it. So the bonus tip, if you're really lazy and can't be bothered looking for them, is you can get some bait and attach it to a float and put it on the bottom and just wait. And most of the time it will attract a bunch of crabs and you can just dive down and grab them that way. One last thing to be aware of is that blue swimmers have a size limit here in South Australia, which is 11 centimeters, and that's measured from the base of its larger spines across the carapace, not spike to spike. And there is also a bag limit of 20 per person. However, it's important to just take what you need, not what you can. So that's basically a quick summary of how I dive for blue swimmer crabs. It's pretty simple and an easy way to get yourself a feed, knowing exactly where your food has come from, while also having fun with your mates. And that's really how I started getting to diving. Apart from that, just be safe and use your common sense, guys, as diving does have its risks. Happy crabbing.